Hey everyone, Panyo here. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of After Dinner Mints. I highly encourage everyone watching to join us in the Art Blocks Discord. A link to our Discord can be found in the description of this video. As always, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss an episode of our weekly show. And now I want to introduce our guest for this afternoon. We have generative artist Steve Pikelny.
Hey, Panya, how's it going?
It's going well. How you doing, Steve?
Good. Glad to be here. Longtime fan, longtime listener of After Dinner Mints.
Yeah, super stoked to have you here. Appreciate you being on. We have a ton to cover, so I want to get right into it. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and kick things off by telling us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So I've been making digital art for the last, I'm going to say 7 or 8 years or so. Before that, I was actually an economics major in college, and I went into finance. I was doing finance for a few years before I got into software development. And very soon after learning to code and just like building websites professionally, I realized that that was actually a really good creative outlet as well. So pretty pretty soon after I started just on the job, I started just making I guess just like art websites that were just not quite generative, but were maybe like tangentially generative art pieces. And yeah, I just started doing that for a few years, and it sort of became a sort of like minor hobby of mine. And then around 2016, I started making more elaborate websites that were less about sort of like the visual stimulation and more began to tell a narrative. And from 2016 through 2022, I built a series of websites that all interlinked together and sort of told like a little bit of a story in in some respect. And yeah, so then like that kind of brought me into 2020, and then NFTs became a thing, and now I'm an NFT artist.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll talk about some of those websites a little bit later
Mhm.
on, which I'm excited to discuss. But I'm kind of curious. Are there some artists that you kind of looked up to, or kind of inspired you with relation to your artwork?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think that's a little bit of a difficult question to answer because while I sort of like grew up and like, my mom took me to museums and I was a big film fan growing up, I think my knowledge of art history isn't amazing. So I think I definitely do have a lot of influences that I'm not really quite sure if I can name, just because just like subconsciously from just like going to a lot of museums and sort of like, skimming art history books, a lot of stuff just sort of osmosed into my brain. But as someone who is terrible with names, it can be a little difficult to sort of like pick out like, oh yes, of course, like this thing inspired me to do that. Um,
Absolutely.
but I think like aside from specific artists, of which I'm sure there are many who many giants who I'm standing on the shoulders of. I think a lot of especially my web work was more inspired by, I guess I'm going to say probably closer to outsider art, because I think a lot of it was sort of like drew from other websites that were created that I found a lot of visual stimulation in that maybe weren't quite created with the intention of being art, but there's definitely a lot of creativity in sort of like building out those experiences.
Definitely. Well, I'm curious now also, since you mentioned in 2020 you got into NFTs, you're a generative artist on, doing stuff on the blockchain. Like, what was your introduction like for the NFT and crypto space? And, did it instantly click for you, or did it kind of take a little bit of time to kind of get to kind of make you believe in the space?
Yeah, sure. So I think if we sort of back up to maybe 2017, so I mentioned that one of my earlier projects is sort of building out a network of websites, which I could actually show you one of them.
Yeah, please.
Um, so So I have this one tab open here, fastcashmoneyplus.biz, which was a project that I started in 2017 in the ICO boom of that year, and I sought to satirize what I was seeing because as an economics major, one of the things I focused on was looking at financial bubbles. And I looked at the ICO boom and I'm like, this is complete mania and this is all insane. It doesn't make any sense. But I still kind of like crypto. I think it's interesting. And I like making weird websites. So I made fastcashmoneyplus.biz, which, as you can see, is the hottest ICO on the internet and a very exciting investment opportunity. And I urge my users to stop throwing away their money on bogus cryptocurrencies and to get fast cash now before it's too late. Because this is the type of thing that crypto traders and investment professionals don't want you to know about. And this is an investment opportunity of a lifetime. So you have to click this button to get started. And there's some modals here. And get those out of the way. And okay, let's get started. So in 2017, this was a project that I was building, and part of it involved creating an actual cryptocurrency. So I actually learned, I use this as an opportunity to teach myself Solidity and to play around with the ERC20 interface. And I made my own ERC20 coin called Fast Cash, and we can return to that in a second, but I have a white paper down here, the official Fast Cash Money Plus white paper that outlines all of the features of the ERC20 token and sort of like goes through, you see a lot of very complicated math going on here. And it sort of like outlines the rules of the price change over time and so on and so forth. So I decided I wanted to make this actual ERC20 token and sort of like house it in this sort of like larger universe. And this was back in 2017. And as I was doing this, I was part of the New York City Ethereum meetup group. And one of the talks they had there was like art on the blockchain. So I'm like, great, I'm doing art on the blockchain. That sounds awesome. And I went there and most of the talks were forgettable. And I have in fact forgotten most of them. But one of the talks was these two guys who got up and started talking about how they made this collection of digital collectibles where you had a lot of pixelated and anthropomorphic images where some of them were male, some were female, some were monkeys, some were zombies, some were aliens, some were apes. And so it was like the Larva Labs guys, and they pretty much outlined their whole spiel on like, yeah, so these are NFTs, and we made this as a digital collectibles thing. We made our own marketplace for it, and this is really cool. And they told the whole story of CryptoPunks up to that point in late 2017, and that experience really stuck with me. And at the time it was like, wow, that's really cool. I'm glad, like, it's really interesting that they used NFTs in this way to create these sorts of like digital collectibles art things. Anyhow, the future of art's really in ERC20 tokens. So let me get back to Fast Cash. And I did that, and then in like 2018, I launched Fast Cash, and I launched another ERC20 token, which legally I'm not allowed to talk about. And yeah, and then I kind of just took a break from crypto for a few years because everything crashed, and I'm like, okay, story's over. And yeah, and then I think the NFT stuff still like really stuck with me, and just as an example, CryptoPunks still really stuck out in my mind. So I think for the next 3 years, even though I continued to make more digital art and I started to expand my universe of websites and sort of like elaborating and like riffing on those themes. The the NFT stuff was still marinating in the back of my head that entire time. So when 2020 rolled around, a friend of mine reached out and sort of mentioned like, hey, like NFTs are really taking off right now. And I'm like, like NFTs, really? Like, why? And it's like, okay, sure, I guess. And he showed me CryptoVoxels and art blocks as two examples of sort of interesting art things that were happening in the space. And I think when I saw those, it instantly clicked with me, just sort of like the possibilities of things you can do. And when I saw art blocks, it's sort of like immediately like, okay, I get what's going on here. This is really interesting. This is cool how all the code is on chain and the person that's buying it is taking part in the creation of this token. And I pretty much immediately put in my application for art blocks. And then a few months later, Jeff emailed me back. He's like, hey, you still interested in doing a project with art blocks? And it's like, yeah, sure, cool, let's do it. And the rest is history.
That's awesome. And we'll talk about that project, CryptoGodKing, in just a minute. But is there a way that you could share with us, kind of your early generative art pieces that you created early on?
Yeah. So I have a lot of this on my website, stevep.xyz, which I guess I'm not sure if I would call this like generative art. Like there are definitely generative components to it. Um, So I'll show you some of it. I guess as you could see here, there's definitely a flash warning on all of these because a lot of these sort of early experiments, one of the things that really stuck out to me was, which I'll show you, is sort of like playing around with um, like it's not like intentionally epilepsy inducing, but I really liked the idea of building something that was just like highly aggressive, such that if you happen to sort of like navigate to this web page, it would sort of like remind you that you're staring at your web browser with very fast flashing bright colors. So the
Mhm.
intention of this was just to sort of uh, be sort of like shock treatment for mindlessly browsing the web. Um, so the reason I wouldn't say this is like, I mean, it's somewhat generative in that there's like elements of randomness to this. This isn't pre-recorded, but it's definitely not in the art blocks vein of long form generative art. Um, Here's another one that I did very early on, which is a little closer in that every time you refresh it, you get a different recursive grid. Um, so this was just a fun project that I built with HTML and CSS animations just very early on to sort of like dip my toes in the water of creative coding. Here's one with some flashing numbers. I forget why I made this, but it looks cool. Let's see what else we got. I think this is a semi-interactive one. Every time you click it, the background changes colors. I believe this is my first React JS project. I don't remember. And what
And
else?
for these little projects that you're putting together, are these more of, they look like more of like experiments. And is this something where you got like inspiration from something, or are these kind of just like tinkering around with just like ideas that you have in the back of your mind?
Yeah, so I think My initial inspiration for this was as I was first learning to code and to build websites, I came across this one website. I think it was called Vart, like VART, where someone essentially just replicated art pieces or famous art techniques with HTML and CSS. And even though I didn't really follow the website, when I read that, it sort of clicked with me like, oh, this is, you could use the web as a creative outlet. And that just immediately, that it just immediately like sort of inspired me to do some experimentation.
Hmm.
And I think with a lot of this stuff, I think in a lot of ways I was probably inspired by more like film and video art, where I think like Stan Brakhage was one video artist who I was a big fan of at the time. I remember, I think with this one, I think one of the inspirations was I'd recently seen Jean-Luc Godard had this one film, the name of which I forgot, but he did some experimentation with 3D and just like really kind of crappy, like you go into this independent theater and you put on these like crappy 3D glasses. And it was actually like a really interesting experience. And like a lot of the scenes there sort of like hurt my eyes in a lot of ways, just because he was doing really weird things where like, okay, so like the left camera stays stationary, but the camera designated to the right eye veers off in a different direction. So then your eyes are looking at different things. And I thought it was just a really interesting effect how you're sitting there watching the movie and you're caught up in this universe, and all of a sudden the filmmaker does something that makes you like a little bit physically uncomfortable, and that sort of shocks you out of your complacency as a viewer, and you sort of remember, oh, I'm sitting in the theater watching a movie, having this experience. So that was something that I sort of wanted to replicate. I'm not sure if I did, but it was at least very fun to make the website, and I
Yeah.
got a lot out of doing these early experimentations.
And I think that's kind of the beauty about, generative art or just kind of building art is you're kind of just experimenting with different things until something clicks and maybe you want to explore it a little bit more.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. And then, yeah, do you have? Are you able to kind of showcase a little bit of the progression of your art on the blockchain? Can you share with us the first NFT that you ever minted, or was that kind of the Crypto God King?
Yeah, so that was Crypto God King, which I have a an example over here. So the I guess like the inspiration for this project was when I saw everything kind of happening in the NFT space. I, on one hand, I looked at it and I'm like, I really like some of the art happening here, and I think generative art is really cool. But I think all the valuations on this are totally insane, and I mean, I think I still do think that a lot of them are insane to a large extent. That's a different story altogether. And it just sort of made me really interested to sort of explore the ideas of like, okay, so we have this like really like this immaterial object, this token thing that people are ascribing a lot of value to. And at the time, I just reread this book by David Graeber called Debt, the First 5,000 Years, where he talks a lot about the history of money and debt over the last 5,000 years, as the name of the book would imply. And one of the really interesting things that uh, I read in that book was that there's a long history of tying money to religion. And that was something that I kind of wanted to explore, because with NFTs you have these digital like immaterial objects that people are ascribing a lot of value to, and they're paying a lot of money for them. So basically this value is being ascribed to this thing that doesn't really exist, and the only reason that that value is there is because people think other people are going to pay a lot of money for it. So there's some like pyramid scheme kind of vibes going on, but at the same time there's like maybe this other sort of like almost like kind of spiritual component to it, where the token just has this aura where it feels like it just has this immaterial value to it. So when I made CryptoGodKing, that was sort of like the themes I was exploring, where just in my sketchbook I had like the all-seeing eye as, or a version of the all-seeing eye, because part of what I explored in a lot of my websites was conspiracy theories. So I think the all-seeing eye is a really good conspiracy theory symbol, but it's also something that has some religious connotations to it, and it's something that appears on the back of the $1 bill. So it sort of inherently has this religious and financial connotation to it. So I used this as a starting point to sort of like build out this series of what in a lot of ways is sort of like a PFP series, where they are anthropomorphic in a lot of ways. I mean, I guess there's an eye in there, but they still have all these like different features where like some of them are upside down, some of them have different like the triangles drawn in different ways. Some of them have an eye that's looking upwards, some have an eye that's looking downwards, some have two circles on them. So pretty much with this I also drew a lot of inspiration just from PFPs in general.
And was this I'm curious to know, was this a project that you had been working on prior to knowing about art blocks, or is this something that once you heard about art blocks, you started developing the project?
No, this was Jeff emailed me and asked if I wanted to do a project on art blocks and if I had anything to show him, and I lied and said yes, and I took 2 days off of work and basically just like totally sprinted on putting something together, just like working 12 hours a day, just to get something that I could show him. And then, yeah, so I think just like an early version of this was something that I was able to show him that I built in maybe like 4 days or so. And then I sort of learned a lesson about making long form generative art that a lot of times the initial version of it you can get out the door pretty quickly, but then it takes like 4 times that amount of time to really sort of like polish it up and make sure that there are no duds in there and that you have like a good level of variety, and to sort of like like adjust things so it sort of fits in with the way that everything's being displayed.
Got it. And I think what's really cool about this project also is that, there is a kind of that interactive, or I just love kind of interacting with the different pieces. There is kind of that sound element to it. And was that your first time, using sound with the project, or is that something you had worked on in the past?
It was not my first time using sound. It's something I've played around with before, and I don't think I've really ever gotten like that much more advanced than what I did in this project. Or I mean, I guess that maybe there are a couple projects I did where it was a little bit more advanced, but for the most part, I think just the web audio API is something that's very fun to play around with. So it's something that I'd experimented with before, and when I had some of these other early experiments that were just sort of like minimalistic web art, um, I like a lot of them did have really sort of like subtle sound components to them.
Hmm. And how did you kind of land on that sound that's being used for this project? Is there like did you have to cycle through, like I guess I'm just kind of interested in knowing your thought process behind the sound that you landed with on Crypto God King.
Yeah, I think with this, a lot of it was I wanted something that had more of a sort of like meditative, spiritual sound to it. So I I forget exactly what I did. I think what I sort of landed on was I essentially have two tones, and I wish I knew more about music theory because then I could explain what is going on here a little more coherently. But I essentially have like two tones that are the same pitch, and then I take one and I increase the frequency just like a little bit. So then it just creates like a really weird interaction between the sine waves,
Hmm.
and then it sort of creates a bit like a bit of like a harmonious kind of like wobbling effect. So I think there I think I pretty much took that from one of my earlier experiments where I had something that was like a little bit similar to that, and I was thinking about ways that I could elevate this project, and that jumped out to me as one possibility.
Cool. And then what are your thoughts behind the zooming in and out interaction? Like I know you can zoom in really close and kind of basically just get into the eye, so to speak, of each mint. But what was your thought process behind adding in that feature?
Um, I don't remember if there was like that specific of a thought process. I think a lot of it was I thought it would be cool to have I guess to sell something that was a little bit more than just a JPEG. And
Hmm.
I think in the description of this where I say, all hail Crypto God King, whose Holy Spirit is opaque to the human eye. While Crypto God King itself cannot be owned, each unique incarnation may belong to a cryptographic soul of the ethereal realm. When viewed through the material lens of a web browser, worshippers may glimpse its essence. Those who retain faith shall be led by an invisible hand towards a higher plane of wealth, whereupon their karmic assets shall yield tremendous spiritual interest. So, like, obviously, in here, I'm trying to draw the connection between the sort of like religious and financial elements of it. But I think just sort of like within the sort of like crypto god king narrative, it's like this idea that like, okay, you have this like immaterial sort of being that isn't really sort of defined by this specific sort of like incarnation. And I thought one way to uh, enhance that feeling was to sort of like give the user something a little bit more than a JPEG to play around with, and just something that feels like it exists in a physical space a little more, where it's like, okay, I'm no longer looking at a JPEG. I'm like entering this space where I can be very far away from this object and then zoom in, and now I'm very close to this object. Now I'm just inside the object, and yeah, so it's more about sort of like creating uh, that feeling that this is like more of like an ethereal kind of thing that's sort of like floating around out there.
Got it. And how did you go about selecting the color palettes for this project? And did you have any personal favorite color combinations?
Um, To be honest, I think for this specific project, I didn't put a ton of thought into the color palette. I think I had a couple different strategies though, where one strategy which you could see I've used on Fast Cache is just use every color possible in very high saturation and use colors with alternating hues. So, for example, on here, I think there's a good one where you just have like pure blue and pure yellow. So you have 100% saturation, 100% lightness, but one color is 60 degrees on the hue wheel, and the other color is 240 degrees on the hue wheel. So they're just perfect contrasts to one another. So one strategy was that. Another strategy was to take high saturation and combine it with a black background. Another strategy was to do the reverse, where all of the strokes are black, and then the secondary color or the primary color was highly saturated. And yes, I think that was like the base of it. And then for a lot of them, they had a more a color scheme that I definitely refined more in Fake Internet Money, which is something that was intended to sort of resemble something maybe like a little older and like a little more kind of like paper currency y, which I think some of them succeeded in, some of them didn't really succeed as well in. And yeah, and then every once in a while there's a black and white one sort of thrown in there.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. And I got to ask about some of these more notable features. I'm curious, and I'm curious to know what your thoughts are behind them. So for Gravy Train, Karmic, Interest Rate, and Financial Burden, like what do those specifically mean in this project?
Those are excellent questions, and I wish I could tell you. I think a lot of them were um, they were just like as I was developing it, there were just lots of like really there were some things that were like actual features in the sense of like, oh, well, if the random number is less than zero point 0.1, then do this, otherwise do this other thing. And I think a lot of those sort of make more sense as features and like things to put into the feature script. But then there were also a lot of features in there where I tried to capture the idea of like, let's see if I could find an example of it. Like, okay, so like this one, for example, like every once in a while you got just the way the circly shapes in the background manifested themselves, you got this really thin sort of trifecta behind here. So part of the feature script was trying to figure out when that pattern manifested itself, and then if it did, sort of say that it was there. I think if we could probably try and figure it out. Um, yeah, like mystical munificence. I have no idea what the commonalities of these two are aside from the color scheme, but I know that the color scheme isn't what the feature refers to. Um, but either way, I mean, I think like part of me at the time, just like, and I guess I still sort of subscribe to this view, is that the feature script in a lot of ways is just for fun, and I don't think you should really ascribe like that much value to it, because
Mm-hmm.
the piece is the piece, and the feature script isn't something that's on chain. It's just sort of one possible way you could view the project.
Definitely.
And I think now that I said that, I think the one exception to that is I think the feature script for Fake Internet Money is very important for understanding the project. But I think for CryptoGodKing, at least, I think my main intention here was I wanted the names of the features to sort of help illustrate a lot of the themes that I was trying to get at
Mhm.
with the project. But I think when you turn on when you filter for gilded tokens, for example, it's like, okay, I guess there's like some similarity here, but it like that feature itself really doesn't like matter that much.
Mhm. Cool. And then yeah, if you're able to, we would love to see some of your favorite mints, or maybe some mints that kind of surprised you.
In this project, let's see. I showed you a couple of them. I think this is my favorite one that I minted, just because it sort of has a little bit more of like a money looking background. I think the animation is very nice here. Um, there's a different project. Um, let's see, clear filters. I guess like one thing I like about this project is because of the small mint size, it's really easy to sort of like keep the whole collection in mind at one
Hmm.
point. But I like this one because this has a really cool, very slow animation going on that when I first looked at it, I didn't even realize that there was an animation, but it's there and it's a lot slower than a lot of the other ones. But but yeah, I mean, so that was a cool project. And then after CryptoGodKing, I then turned my focus to fake internet money, but that ended up being a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. So I took a detour into this other project. I saw it in a dream,
Yeah.
which I I think if you look at both projects enough, you'll see maybe like some of the similarities. But with this project, I what originally what I was trying to do was here. I guess I could just skip ahead to a fake internet money mint. Where so originally what I was trying to do was I was working on this rosette component, which took a lot of thinking and planning and experimenting with different things and trying to figure out what I was doing. And I had a couple failed attempts that still looked really cool. So once I realized that fake internet money was taking a lot longer than I thought it was going to take, I decided to sort of do a spin-off project where I took one of those failed components and sort of riff on that a little bit. So what I ended up with was I saw it in a dream, and I gave it that name because late one night when I was working on fake internet money, uh, I closed my eyes and I still sort of like saw some of that galoche pattern in my head, and I saw something that like kind of it was the same pattern, but it was like more neon looking, and I thought to myself like, okay, that still looks like pretty cool. Let me like get up and like write some notes about what this is. And I wrote some notes, and then this is what I came up with, where you don't quite have the galoche pattern, but you still have this sort of curvy star pattern that overlaps itself. So this is a, in some ways, a much more simplified version of that pattern, but also it's abstracted out in a much different way.
Hmm. Great. And yeah, do you have any, specific mints or favorite mints or kind of features that you wanted to talk about from this project?
Yeah, I think this one was. I think this is definitely one of my favorite mints, just because it looks like it has a lot of energy to it. But I think what was cool about this project was once I landed on the core algorithm for it and saw that it had a lot of diversity, then it was like pretty easy to sort of turn like pick which knobs I wanted to turn and get to a collection that would stand up to about 1,000 mints on it. So for this one in particular, you have the main pattern of the stars radiating outwards with a shadow behind them and a line in the middle, and this one, the um, the starting the start and end of the star don't match up, so you end up with this weird kink in the shape. Um, and it comes off as more off kilter. But then the background is much more zoomed in and fatter, and maybe lines up a little bit better. And then in the background, a you have a more stippled background that was inspired a bit more by pop art. So I think this one for me, it felt more sort of like inspired by like pop art and in some ways surrealism, just because it feels like you're also sort of like floating around this like weird skewed kind of space. Um, this is another one of my favorites where it has three different layers, but this first layer is really sort of like zoomed in and fat, but you get this cool eye at the top where you can see the other two layers behind it. So one day I might make a print of this one for myself because I think it's really cool. And this is another cool one where it has this feature that for some reason I decided to call elbows, which I don't know. It looks neat. I like it, and it adds like a little bit of flavor to it. But I think like one of the fun parts about this was sort of like having the core algorithm and adding a few sort of like rare features to it. So I think we could actually like pull this project up.
I'm curious to know. So, do you offer prints for any of your projects, or how do you go about, displaying the art that you've created? Is that something that you have opinions about, or is it kind of just however collectors see fit?
Yeah, I do offer prints. To be honest, I kind of am sick of making them. Um, I mean, in some ways, like I like making them. I think it's been a while since I've done a round of prints, and it always brings me joy to see that someone especially likes this piece and they want to hang it in their home, and to get like an excited message from them being like, I love this, I want this printed out. And I love like going to the print shop and like looking at the final version of it and just to see it much bigger and just on paper. And it's like that's such a good experience. But at the same time, I just like hate dealing with the bureaucracy of like taking in the order and like kind of like working with the print shop and making sure everyone's address is correct and doing all that stuff. So
Mhm.
I'm thinking for the next round of printing that I do, I am going to sell the print more or less at cost, but the collector needs to send me like an antique currency bill or like an antique foreign currency or something like really obscure that
I love
they
it.
have to like put in effort to do it. They can't just like pay for it with modern money.
I love that. I love that idea a lot. All right, so you're looking at some other pieces from I Saw It in a Dream.
Yeah, so I think there's a good one that has like some more sort of like rare features to it. Where this one has transparency, which I think like one in like 16 of them roughly have that feature, and it just sort of gives off a very different vibe. Um,
Yeah, if you got
so
like one or two more, and we can jump into fake internet money.
yeah, sure. What we got on this page? This one's pretty cool because it has another feature of just the the stars, the edges of the stars overlap one another, so it has this weird like overlapping effect. So I think at least from like a probability standpoint, it's cool because you have like a handful of features that only show up like 1 in 16 times, and that means that there are a few in there that have multiple of those rare features.
Mhm.
This one isn't particularly that rare, but someone bought a print of it, so I have the proof of this print hanging in my room right now. So I
And I
want
know
to get.
you talked a little bit about prints. So if that token were to be transferred to someone else, would you allow someone else to get a print of that, or is that kind of a one and done kind of thing?
Um, I mean, I'm not like that strict on it, to
Mhm.
be honest. I think if the owner of the token wants a print and I'm doing prints, then I'll give it to them.
Mhm.
There was one case where someone wanted to get a Christmas present for their friend, where their friend was the one that owned the token, and I just sort of, trusted that that's what happened. So if I guess anyone wants to get a print of a token they don't own, then I suppose that's a story you could tell me, and I may or may not believe it. But yeah, I'm not like super strict with it. I think at the end of the day, just if people want my art hanging in their home, then that's very flattering, and it's hard for my ego to say no to that, despite hating bureaucracy and red tape. So one way or another, I'll probably do it.
Totally understandable, and I think that's what's great also is that everyone's just gonna have a different opinion on this,
Hmm.
and, I think there's a beauty in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to talk about fake internet money. I think it's such a fun project. It sounds like, this is something you had your eye on working on this project, but then, like you said, since it took a lot longer, you decided to do I Saw It on a Dream. So I would kind of love to know a little bit about the process of creating fun internet money and, or fake internet money. And then is this something that, yeah, kind of just like the concept behind this project?
Yeah, so I think in a lot of ways, I'd like to think the concept behind this project is pretty straightforward. Where I think like what's interesting about the NFT space, and this is sort of like what I was talking about earlier with CryptoGodKing, is that we have these really like ephemeral and immaterial token things that are just like floating around, and people are paying a lot of money for them. And in the case of art blocks, they're paying a lot of money for them because they're buying art. And I think especially over last summer, we got to this point where there was clearly this big speculative bubble, and a lot of the art just became very financialized, where I think to the point where it was just like kind of weird how people just sort of like treat the art as like an asset class, where people sort of treated like, oh, like art blocks curated is like, if it has this like gold stamp of approval on it because like these people said, because these people like the art, then it is like automatically just worth a lot more money than the projects that don't have the gold star of approval on it. And I think it's silly, because it's like, I think it's like, it's art, you should buy what you like.
Hmm.
And it's just sort of like weird that um, just because someone says that they like this piece more than this other piece, it's like we've now built these sort of like asset classes around it. And people, especially at that time, were just sort of like treating them as asset classes, where it's like, okay, art blocks curated is a blue chip investment that I'm going to buy, which is like, okay, sure, like whatever. Um, so I think there's obviously a lot of stuff going on in terms of like financialization of the art. So that was something I wanted to explore with this project, where I like really wanted to sort of like kind of explore the relationship between art and money. And I thought it'd be cool to do a project where the art like literally is money in a lot of ways. Because I mean, like, I guess taking a step back, one thing I will say is this is a lot of me like retroactively analyzing the project. I think at the time, a big part of me was just like, I like the aesthetics of money. Money looks cool. I like the patterns on it. It would be fun to explore this as like a generative art project. But then I think as I started doing the exploration, I started realizing all of these themes that I wanted to sort of pick out. And I think one of those themes was sort of like analyzing, um, definitely analyzing like the relationship between like art and money, but also looking at paper currency and looking at how people ascribe value to the paper currency. So, for example, sort of like in my research of, you could even see here on like on my web browser, I have like a money tab, and there's like this awesome website, numista.com, that just has like banknotes from like every country, and it's like picking like Cameroon, for example. It's like, great, we have these like gorgeous, really cool banknotes, and it's like really fun to sort of just like browse this website and to look at all the different patterns that are on the banknotes, and there's like a lot of variety there. But I think like one thing that's like really interesting about this is a lot of that money is worth more as a collector's item than it ever was as a currency. So I think like one example of this is the see if we could find it, the Zimbabwean currency, which, as you may know, Zimbabwe in the in 2008 underwent a massive stint of hyperinflation. So now we have these bills that say $100 trillion on them, which, you know, is like absurd, and it's just like completely insane. And these bills were just became worthless as currency because they were just inflated to hell. But the funny thing is that I thought, like, you know, like I think this is cool, and as a fan of paper currency, I wanted to get my hands on some $100 trillion Zimbabwean banknotes, and I found that these bills are actually quite expensive because they're a pretty sought after collector's item because of the absurd $100 trillion bit on it.
Did you
So I
collect
think
one?
I did not collect it. I think they're like 20 or $30 to like get one of
Oh
them.
wow.
Where like at the time, I just made that up. I don't know how much it is. I remember
Yeah.
looking at it and thinking like, wow, that's a lot of money for something that was at one point deemed completely worthless. Um, so I think there's just like an interesting example of something where like as a piece of money, this thing is totally worthless. Like this thing that's supposed to function as is like completely broken, and it's completely worthless in that regard. But as a collector's item, like due to its aesthetics, it is now worth more than what it's supposed to be. It's worth more than it says that it's worth on it.
Hmm. And I'm
And I
curious
thought,
to know from.
mhm.
I was just gonna say, do you? So I've seen a lot of collectors view these as sets, so they'll buy like different, bills because they have obviously different numbers on there. Is that how you kind of saw this project? Like people would collect these in form sets, or how did you look at that?
Yeah, I think I definitely designed this to be a very collectible project in that, you know, like obviously it's like the art on it is different because it's generative art, but I think it's also just interesting to, you know, just have like different denominations on there. So it's like, okay, here's a 5 bill just because it has like V on it. And there's some other bills in here where it's like, okay, this one says 100 on it. So is it worth more? Like, I
Hmm.
guess because it said 100 is a higher number than 50, and there are fewer of the hundreds than there are 50s. So there's definitely like that element to it. I think with this one, one other thing that I always thought was really interesting about collecting paper currency is that people pay a lot of attention to the serial numbers. So this one's interesting because it's a star note, which means that
Mm.
the bill was damaged in the printing process and it had some horrible misprint on it that they couldn't release into circulation. So they took the bill off the printing press and they reprinted it with the same serial number. But to sort of denote that this is a different bill with the same serial number, they put a star next to it. So if you're next time you get a bunch of $1 bills, take a look at the serial number. Some of them are going to have stars next to them. Maybe I think like one in based on a completely informal survey, I've found that like about 1 in 250 of them have
Star on
or
there.
$1 bills have stars on them.
Oh, that's awesome.
So this is something collectors pay attention to. Collectors also pay attention to, and this is why the features are important in this specific project. They also pay attention to the serial numbers themselves. So this one has an increasing serial number where it goes 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 4, 9, 9. And there are all sorts of sort of like rare serial numbers. In fact, I think there's like cool serial numbers.com. Yeah, coolserialnumbers.com. Look at this website with like fancy serial numbers. So we got solids, which I guess is 6666666. We got ladders where every digit is one number higher or lower than the previous. We have radar bills, which are just like palindromes. Like we have repeaters, we have radar repeaters, we have super repeaters, and you just have like all of these like kind of stupid things that people like find out in the wild, and they're they're very unusual. So just like as a collector's item, uh, like this $20 bill would be worth more than $20 just because essentially because
Of
of
its
the
cereal.
aesthetics of it.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Do you have any
um,
favorites from this project?
yeah. So I guess here's one favorite I have just sort of like clicking through what I brought up. Some of them have like a smiley face on it, which I think is fun because as I was building this, and also just like looking at other bits of currency, the like most currency has things that aren't like totally abstract on it. They have like pictures of people or like presidents or politicians or whatever. And I kind of wanted to do that, but I also thought that would be like really difficult to do in a generative art context. So I was thinking of like other things I can do. So I made this like dopey little smiley face thing as like a stand-in for a president or whatever. And I felt like this like really fits the theme of money that isn't actually money, and it has it emphasizes the fakeness of it.
Hmm.
um so I think that's a good one. Oh yeah, so I guess another thing I should sort of point out is that the way the series is organized is that they're sort of like, aside from the denominations, I think one of the key things that stands out are there three main themes to it, where one is fiat, which has more of like a paper currency looking theme, and this looks a little bit more realistic. Whereas the second one is a crypto theme, which sort of similar to the color schemes I was working on with CryptoGodKing. There's it's sort of like a dark background with a much more saturated neon stroke color. And then there's a Boolean color scheme, which either appears gold or silver on it. So, yeah, so just sort of like going through the mints, that's something that stands out. I think this might be one of my favorites, if not my favorite, of the entire collection because so like another thing I did on this was, aside from the smiley face, I wanted to put CryptoGodKing on there because I thought that that would help draw the connection between the the two projects, and it just looks really cool in front of the rosette. And this
Yeah.
one in particular has a so another thing I did was misprints. So this one has a pigmentation misprint on it, so you end up with like really weird colors going on here, and I just think that this one just came out like really beautiful in the color scheme and the crypto god king with the rosette in the background. So I actually had
Yeah.
a print of this made as a test print for myself, and
Awesome.
I think it looks really cool.
Yeah, that's a stunning mint. I do want to jump into Fast Cash Money and also talk a little bit about your project that's upcoming on Art
Mhm.
Blocks. So Fast Cash Money, you kind of talked a little bit about it, and I'm obviously you built several of these websites, and is this something where you plan to have kind of continue this series of websites and yeah, just kind of explore something different?
Yeah, so I think with sort of like as I was saying earlier, like with Fast Cash Money Plus .biz, it's like I did this in 2017, and this was part of a, I guess like a larger series of websites. So this actually started out with I made a fake news website called fakebullshit.news, which I now use this mainly as a website to like write puff pieces for my projects on it. Um, but this sort of like came out in late 2016 as sort of like the idea of fake news became a thing, and um, sort of similar to that one early piece I was showing you. I really like the idea of just having a website that just exists and it's like kind of out in the open, and in a lot of ways it's sort of like just like an installation where you just happen to stumble upon it and you're not like quite sure what it is, but it sort of makes you sort of like question your web browsing experience and sort of like how you're using the internet. So I think with this project, it definitely sort of like brings into question like, okay, is this a real website? Like, is this a real fake news website? Is it a fake news website? Like, what's going on here? And then like hopefully like as you start questioning that, you also start questioning like, okay, like the new legislation liberals don't want you to know about, and then hopefully that starts getting you thinking about like, okay, well, is this really like that different from maybe some of the other websites that I visit? And I think like in a lot of ways the intention here is to start or to make you sort of like question sort of like the reality that is built by the websites that you currently inhabit.
Mhm.
So that was the initial intention with this project. And then part of it, as you could see, was I wanted to have some fake advertisements on there. So then I just, at the time, I owned fastcashmoneyplus.biz, just like the domain name. So this used to point to something else. But then once I actually built this, I thought it would be cool if I sort of link the two projects. So it's like, okay, so now if I click the link over here for this advertisement, I end up on fastcashmoneyplus.biz. And then, is this on? Yeah. So then, like in the reviews, I sort of like link back to it by saying, I sort of link back to it by linking to Patrick Swanson talking about the hot new crypto asset that you don't want to miss out on. Um, yeah, so this is even. I think I messed this up. I might have like multiple. This one's about CryptoGodKing. This one is not about fast cash. Yeah, I think. Oh, because I gave it. There are two in here that have the URL hot new crypto, I think,
Okay. Oh,
which
that's awesome.
gives you a sense of where my head was at when I made this. Um, but yeah, so that's sort of like how it started, where I ended up with these two different. Excuse me. I ended up with these two different websites, and then when I was looking for a third website to build, I thought like, okay, so my my favorite part about building this one was having all of the fake comments on here, where and that sort of like served to help build out this reality, which you'll actually see on a lot of scam websites. Is they I wish I pulled up one of these scam websites to show you, but a lot of times when they're selling, oh, actually, I can show you one. I just found, this is totally off topic, but I found this one website recently called ilovemylaser.com, which has a testimonials page. And it's like, I did the laser on my kneecap as I had injured it, and my knee has stopped clicking, and I have no pain now. And I have a friend who tried the laser while visiting us. He had an old sports injury that had caused him pain daily for 20 years. After about 1 hour on the laser, he has been pain free. So, but like that's like a common technique I see on a lot of scam websites. So I thought it would be funny to sort of like have a bunch of fake comments on the article. And it got to the point where it's like, okay, well, my favorite thing about fake bullshit.news is the fake ads and the fake comments on it. And even on Fast Cash, there's one point where you end up with like a chat modal where you could talk to a fictionalized version of me on it. And those are all things I wanted to explore, just more of like the written out like narrative component of it. So that is what I did with my fake social media website, friendworld.social, which for a while was actually a functioning social media website that mostly my friends used. But it was really fun to kind of like create a lot of characters on here that all interact with one another, and to like meanwhile have this sort of like parallel track of fake advertisements that sometimes direct you to real websites, sometimes just direct you to other websites that I made.
And where can people learn more about your websites, or where can they see kind of the full list of your websites you created?
Yeah, you could see it all on steviep.xyz, which
Awesome.
has it has all the NFT stuff, but if you sort of scroll down, then it'll show you uh fake bullshit.news, fast cash money plus, friendworld.social, this other one, which I don't know if we have time to talk about, but this is this is where I got my
Oh yeah,
hat
the merch one.
from.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this was also has some fake bullshit.news reviews on it. Um, oh, here's my hat.
And that's an
Um,
actual website where people can go to, right? And actually purchase some of these items.
yep, you could actually, if you want a super spreader T-shirt, then Starseeker gave it 5 stars and says that's wonderful. And Wendy Pilson says it's very comfortable and a nice soft shade of blue. And you could buy it now on Zazzle.
I love it. We'll have to rock some of that out and bring it to Marfa sometime later this year when we have our annual event.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Please do.
Well, I do want to talk a little bit about your project that's going to be dropping. I don't know, sometime in the next several weeks, I'm assuming. But it's
Hmm.
called Maps of Nothing, and yeah, I just wanted to learn a little bit more about that project and the concept behind it.
Yeah, so here it is. This is a map of nothing. So June 13th, mark it on your calendar. June 13th, I think is the date I have. Uh, but yeah, so I think like the idea behind this in a lot of ways started similar to fake internet money, where I was trying to think of, okay, like what are some generative art ideas I have that have like really interesting patterns on it and just like a really interesting aesthetic, but something that also has some uh like fertile ground for just like exploring interesting concepts in it. And sort of like as you can see on like my wall behind me, I'm a big fan of maps aside from the currency. So it pretty much like after I did the currency, I decided, okay, maps are next up. And I decided to start working on this map project. And I think like one of the things I think is interesting about this is that sort of like doing this like right after fake internet money, it sort of creates like an interesting dynamic where I think where maps are something that you inherently produce to sort of like represent reality and like they exist as like an abstraction of reality, and they're there to like help you like navigate or to convey some sort of message or whatever. So I thought it'd be sort of funny to do a project called Maps of Nothing, where it's like, okay, I have something that's a map, or at least it looks like a map, but there's no actual sort of like reality behind it. So sort of similar to fake internet money, this is in a lot of ways a fake internet map, and and yeah, so I think just like some of the ways I explore that is through creating the grid, but also doing it in such a way where kind of similar to fake internet money, where there are a lot of misprints on there. Um, the Maps of Nothing has a lot of, I mean, there's some misprints there, but it also has a lot of things I'd more consider like imperfections. So, for example, this is the zeroth mint of Maps of Nothing, and if you zoom in, then just sort of like one thing that's like inherent to the project is the strokes are designed to look more like they were produced by a faulty printer, or just something where it allowed for different sorts of like ink runs, and you could sort of like look at the texture of the paper and get a sense of like this, like, so clearly this is sort of like a simulation. This isn't only a simulation of a map. This is like a simulation of a paper map. So at this point, we're sort of like several layers removed from reality on this. And the I think one of the important things about this project is we have the map displayed, but we also have splotches of color on the map, and depending on which one you're looking at, the splotches sort of like read as different things. So in this one, for example, the sort of like looking at it, like, to me, it looks like this could either the blue here could either represent water, even though there's like a grid behind it. Just like the blue sort of like looks like it could be water. It could represent, as one of my friends put it, sort of like gentrification closing in on like one area of a city, because a lot of maps have similar patterns to represent sociological phenomenon. Um, here's I just have like a bunch of test prints, or a bunch of like test mints on my own machine. Um, so here's one just like without the color splotches, just to sort of like give you a sense of like what the base looks like. This one has like a bit more color on it, and I think this one's also interesting in that the splotches escape the boundaries of the map, and in some cases sit on top of the map itself. So I think
Mm.
here it's just like looking at it, it's sort of like it's a little confusing whether or not the splotches are meant to be part of the paper, if they're part of like the map itself. And I think just having stuff on the edges out here sort of it sort of like highlights the perception that this is ink on paper, and that you're not looking at a city, you're just looking at a map itself.
Yeah, that one has definitely like a psychedelic look to it also.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Is there
Yeah.
anything else you wanted to add from this project?
This is a pretty good one. It's definitely like a bit more chaotic, where it's still using the same like underlying pattern, but um yeah, we got more much curlier streets, and like the a lot of the streets are more chaotic looking, and we still have the same sort of dynamic that I was just describing with different color splotches on here. So I think even though this one looks a little bit less map-like, it still has that sort of like interesting dynamic of like, I'm not quite sure how this is supposed to read, where you have this pattern that's printed on this material, and I'm not sure if the colors are, or like, I'm not sure like what exactly is supposed to be the pattern itself and what exactly is supposed to be the material it's printed on. Even though at the end of the day, it's all digitally rendered. It's all a simulation.
Yeah, I love it.
And oh yeah, so I guess it's like one more thing just in terms of the misprints. I think here's sort of it's going to load. Okay, yeah. So here's sort of like one other thing that I use to sort of like draw the connection between Fake Internet Money and Maps of Nothing, where at the end of the day, they're both projects that are about like they're sort of skeuomorphic in that they're both these digital simulations of a paper thing. So I thought that one sort of like really funny thing to explore would be like, okay, even though this is definitely digital and we know it's all digital and that it's not actually real paper, it would be funny to sort of like inject some types of misprints that really only make sense in a paper context. So with Fake Internet Money, it's sort of like, okay, like with real bills, you have this misprint where the content is misaligned and you're printed sort of like off the paper itself. So I thought it'd be funny to sort of like bring that misprint into this project where you have the pattern of the map that is clearly supposed to be printed in a very straight way, but by sort of like bringing it off center, it sort of like highlights the fact that you're not looking at a city, that you're looking at like a print of a pattern that's supposed to represent a city, sort of.
Got it. That's awesome. Well, I definitely look forward to seeing this project live on Art Blocks. So, what's the date again for the release of this project?
June 13. And I was very
Great.
happy to get project number 316 because I'm a
Yeah.
big Stone Cold Steve Austin fan. And
Yeah.
613 is 316 but backwards. So
Oh, that's awesome.
it all lines up.
It'll be easy to remember, that's for sure. Cool. Well, I appreciate you being on, Steve. Do you mind telling us and all the people listening, how can they reach you if they have any questions? Maybe you have any social media plugs?
Yeah, sure. So everything is pretty much on my website. So that's steviep.xyz. My Twitter is also steviepxyz, so just the website without the dot. And you should join my Discord server, which is discord.steviep.xyz. And
I had no idea you had one.
you should join it. It's a great
Yeah, I
place.
will.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
What was I going to say? I was going to say that similar to all my other stupid websites, all my social media stuff is all linked together. And the Discord says the Twitter, and the Twitter has the Discord and the website has the Discord and the Twitter and all that good stuff.
Awesome. All interconnected. Cool. Well, Steve, I appreciate you being on After Dinner Mints today, talking about all your projects and, learning about the upcoming project, which will be releasing just next month in June. So appreciate you being on.
I'm excited. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, we got a couple news and notes on next week's pre-recorded After Dinner Mints, which will be released on June the 1st. We're going to have generative artist Jacob Gold. We also have a Twitter Spaces discussion called Minters and Makers. It's a weekly show with 3 to 5 artists, collectors, and other notable community members with conversations surrounding art. Our next show is on June the 2nd, starting at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, featuring Santiago, Phenomena, and William Mapan. You can tune into that conversation on the ArtBlocks Twitter handle, which is at artblocks_IO. These discussions are all recorded and available in a podcast format, which is the same thing with After Dinner Mints. All of our discussions here on After Dinner Mints are being turned into a podcast, so make sure you tune into that. Finally, we have a weekly newsletter that gets delivered once a week with information on upcoming drops and generative art related news. You can find a link to the newsletter in the description of the YouTube video. I want to thank Steve Pikelny, for joining me on After Dinner Mints. For everyone that's tuning in, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Be kind to each other, buy what you love, and we will see you all next week. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.